Deathworlder Armada wasn't the rescue aliens hoped for. The crystal spires of New Celestia stretched toward the twin suns, their surfaces reflecting the emergency broadcast that flooded every communication channel across the harmonious alliance. In the Grand Assembly Hall, representatives from 43 peaceful species sat in their designated floating pods, their various forms of distress creating a symphony of fear that echoed through the crystalline walls. High Chancellor Zephyr, her gossamer wings trembling with anxiety, stood at the center of the hall. The ethereal had served the Alliance for over 2 centuries, but nothing in her long life of diplomatic service had prepared her for this moment. Her delicate hands moved across the holographic controls, and the hall fell silent as images materialized in the air above them. The first image showed Paradise Station, the Alliance's crown jewel, a massive ring habitat that housed 50 million beings in perfect harmony. Gardens spiraled around its interior, and artificial waterfalls created rainbows in the controlled atmosphere. The second image showed the same station 3 days later, a twisted wreck of metal and crystal, venting atmosphere into the void like blood from a wound. "This is what the Ravagers do," Zephyr said, her melodic voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "They come without warning, they take what they want, and they leave only death behind." More images followed, colony after colony reduced to smoking ruins. The Ravagers moved like a plague of locusts across Alliance space, their massive bioships consuming everything in their path. These organic monstrosities grew stronger with each victory, incorporating the technology and genetic material of their victims into their ever-evolving fleet. Defense Coordinator Thane rose from his pod in the military section. The ancient crystalline being's normally radiant form had dimmed with stress, but his voice still rang with desperate authority. "We have tried everything," he announced. "Our shield networks, our harmony weapons, our negotiation protocols, nothing works. The Ravagers don't communicate, they don't negotiate, they simply consume." A representative from the Silk Collective raised one of her 8 graceful limbs. "How many worlds have we lost?" 27 systems, Thane replied. 15 billion souls. The number doesn't capture the true horror entire civilizations. Their art, their music, their accumulated wisdom of millennia, all gone. The assembly erupted in sounds of grief that transcended species barriers. Some representatives wept, others made keening sounds in their native tongues, and a few simply sat in stunned silence. The Alliance had known peace for over 1,000 years. Their society was built on cooperation, understanding, and the belief that all conflicts could be resolved through dialogue. "We need new perspectives," said Elder Sage, the ancient leader of the council. Her crystalline form pulsed with inner light as she spoke, each word carrying the weight of her 800 years. "Our ways of peace have served us well, but they cannot stop this threat." "What about the warrior caste of Sigma Draconis?" asked someone from the back. "Consumed," Thane replied grimly. "The Ravagers adapted to their military formations within hours. The defensive grid of the core worlds was overrun last week. Even our most militant allies have fallen." The hall grew quiet again. These were the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, and they had all failed. The Ravagers were only 2 weeks away from the Alliance's heart worlds, where trillions of beings lived in the galaxy's most precious sanctuaries. Dr. Luna stepped forward from the scientific section, the small sapphire being rarely spoke in these gatherings. But when she did, her words carried the weight of vast intelligence. "There might be one option we haven't considered," she said quietly. "What option?" Elder Sage asked, her form brightening with hope. Dr. Luna activated her research pad, and new information appeared on the main display. "A species from the outer dark. They call themselves humans, and they originate from a world designated as Sol 3, locally known as Earth." The display showed a blue and brown planet with white atmospheric swirls. It looked deceptively peaceful from space, but the data that appeared next told a different story. "This world is classified as a Class Omega death world," Dr. Luna continued. "It has the highest danger rating in our xenological database. The gravity is crushing, the atmosphere is corrosive to most species, the weather systems are catastrophically violent, and the planet experiences regular extinction-level events." A murmur of disbelief went through the assembly. Most Alliance worlds were carefully terraformed paradises where danger was virtually unknown. The idea of a species evolving on such a hostile world seemed absurd. But here's what makes them interesting, Dr. Luna said. Not only did they survive on this world, they conquered it. They turned every planetary threat into a tool. They've been fighting for survival since the moment they achieved consciousness. The display showed images of human cities, human technology, and human faces. They looked similar to several humanoid species in the Alliance, but there was something different about them. Their eyes held a hardness that spoke of constant struggle, and their expressions carried a weight that peaceful species rarely bore. They developed faster than light travel only recently, Dr. Luna continued. By our standards, their technology is primitive, but their approach to problems is unique. They don't follow normal patterns of civilized development. Defense Coordinator Thane's form flickered with skepticism. How can a primitive species help us when our most advanced civilizations have failed? Because they think differently, Dr. Luna replied. Look at their planetary history. New images appeared, humans fighting not just each other, but their own world. They showed battles against natural disasters, struggles against predators, and the gradual conquest of a planet that seemed determined to kill them. What disturbed many of the assembled beings was how the humans seemed to embrace conflict rather than avoid it. They've been at war with something for their entire existence, Dr. Luna explained. If not with each other, then with their environment, with disease, with extinction events. Their entire culture is built around overcoming obstacles that should be impossible to overcome. High Chancellor Zephyr studied the images with growing unease. What makes you think they could help us? Their planet tried to kill them every day for millions of years, Dr. Luna said. They survived by learning to fight back against forces much larger and more powerful than themselves. To them, the Ravagers would just be another predator to overcome. Elder Sage's form pulsed thoughtfully. They're a young species with limited technology. What could they possibly do that we cannot? I don't know, Dr. Luna admitted, but I know that conventional thinking hasn't saved us. We need someone who doesn't know that our enemy is supposed to be unstoppable. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Many representatives argued that it was foolish to trust their survival to such a primitive and violent species. Others pointed out that they were running out of options. The Ravagers were getting closer every day, and traditional alliance methods had proven useless. Finally, Elder Sage called for silence. We will send a message to Earth, she decided. We will ask for their assistance. What is the worst that could happen? Defense Coordinator Thane prepared the message himself. It was a formal request for military assistance against an enemy that threatened all life in the galaxy. He included detailed information about the Ravagers and the coordinates where human forces should meet the Alliance fleet. As the message traveled through hyperspace toward the small blue world, the Alliance continued their preparations. They evacuated civilians from threatened worlds, gathered their remaining defensive forces, and prepared for what many believed would be their final stand. They expected perhaps a few small ships with eager volunteers, maybe some new ideas that might give them a slight advantage. They certainly didn't expect what was actually coming their way. 2 weeks after the message was sent, long-range sensors detected ships approaching the rendezvous point. The Alliance military leaders prepared to welcome their new allies and explain the situation. They had no idea that everything they thought they knew about warfare was about to be turned upside down. The sensor operator aboard the Alliance flagship Harmony of Worlds stared at her display in confusion. Commander, I'm getting readings from the human fleet, but they don't make sense. Commander Lyra glided over to examine the data. The elegant Gossamer officer had commanded ships for 40 years, but she had never seen readings like these. What exactly are you detecting? The ships are much larger than we anticipated, and their energy signatures are all wrong. These don't look like peaceful vessels or light military craft. Defense Coordinator Thane arrived on the bridge just as the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace. Through the main viewing portal, he could see them clearly for the first time. His crystalline form dimmed in shock. The human ships were massive. The smallest was 3 times the size of a standard Alliance cruiser. The largest was bigger than anything Thane had ever seen in active service. But it wasn't their size that made him stare. It was their appearance. Where Alliance ships were elegant and beautiful, These human vessels looked like they had been built for war and nothing else. Their hulls were covered in thick armor plating that showed signs of recent battle damage. Scorch marks, impact craters, and welded patches covered every surface. Some ships had entire sections that looked like they had been rebuilt using completely different materials. "By the Crystal Throne," whispered Commander Lyra. "What kind of fleet is this?" The ships moved in formation, but not the graceful patterns that civilized fleets used. They spread out like a pack of hunting animals, each ship covering the others while maintaining freedom to move. Their weapons were clearly visible, mounted on the outside of their hulls like the fangs of some great beast. "They look like they've been fighting a war for decades," said the sensor operator. "Maybe they have," Thane replied quietly. A communication signal came through from the lead human ship. The voice that spoke was rough and direct, with none of the formal courtesy used in diplomatic exchanges. "This is Admiral Chen of the Terran Defense Force. We got your distress call. Where do you want us?" Thane stepped forward to the communication panel. "Admiral Chen, this is Defense Coordinator Thane of the Harmonious Alliance. We are deeply grateful for your response to our request. We have prepared comprehensive briefing materials about our enemy and detailed strategic analyses for your review." There was a pause. Then the human voice came back, sounding slightly amused. "Strategic analyses? Coordinator, we've been fighting for 6 days straight to get here. Half my ships are running on emergency power, and my crews haven't slept in a week. Just tell us where the bad guys are." The alien officers on the bridge exchanged confused glances. Fighting for 6 days? The human fleet had just arrived. Where had they been fighting? "Admiral, perhaps there has been some misunderstanding," Thane said carefully. "We are dealing with the Ravagers, a biomechanical hive mind that has been advancing through our territory. We called for assistance because our peaceful methods have proven ineffective." "Yeah, we know about your Ravager problem," Admiral Chen replied. "We ran into 5 of their scouting fleets on the way here. Took us a while to figure out how they tick, but we got it sorted out." The bridge fell silent. Scouting fleets? The humans had engaged Ravager forces before arriving at the rendezvous point? This was impossible. Scouting fleets were still incredibly dangerous, and the humans were supposed to be a primitive species. "Admiral," Thane said slowly, "you engaged Ravager forces?" "Engaged and eliminated," came the reply. "Nasty things, those bioships. They adapt fast, but they don't handle unexpected tactics very well. We'll need to discuss your overall strategy, though. The way you've been fighting these things, you're making it too easy for them." Thane felt a chill run through his crystalline structure. The humans had not only fought the Ravagers they had won, and now they were criticizing Alliance military strategy. "Perhaps we should meet in person," Thane suggested. "We can arrange transport to bring you aboard our command ship." "No need," Admiral Chen said. "We'll dock directly. The Beijing has universal docking ports." The human flagship approached the Harmony of Worlds slowly. Up close, it was even more intimidating. The ship was 2 kilometers long and built like a mobile fortress. Its hull was scarred from countless battles, and its weapon systems were clearly designed for maximum destruction rather than elegant efficiency. The docking process itself was unlike anything the Alliance officers had seen. Instead of the smooth, automated systems used by civilized ships, the human vessel extended mechanical arms that grabbed onto the Harmony's hull. The connection was rough but effective. When the airlock opened, Admiral Chen stepped through, followed by 2 other officers. The humans looked exactly like the images in the Alliance database, but seeing them in person was different. They moved with the confident grace of apex predators, and their eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, as if looking for threats. Admiral Chen was a woman in her 50s, with graying hair and deep lines around her eyes. Her uniform was practical rather than decorative, and she carried herself like someone who had seen too much combat. The other officers, Captain Rodriguez and Commander Singh, were younger, but had the same hardened look. "Coordinator Thane," Admiral Chen said, extending her hand in the human greeting gesture. "Good to meet you in person." Thane extended a crystalline appendage to shake the offered hand, noting the surprising warmth and strength of the human's grip. "Admiral Chen, we are honored by your assistance in our time of need." "Don't thank us yet," Chen replied. "We haven't seen the full scope of your problem. Let's look at your tactical data." They moved to the briefing chamber, where Thane had prepared a comprehensive presentation about the Ravagers. The holographic display showed the enemy's advance through Alliance territory, their adaptive capabilities, and the failed attempts to stop them. As the briefing continued, Admiral Chen asked questions that made the Alliance officers uncomfortable. Her inquiries focused on things they had never considered important. How fast could the Ravagers replace destroyed units? What was their supply chain like? Did they have any central command structure that could be targeted? You've been fighting them like they're a conventional military force, Chen observed, but they're a biological weapon system. You don't defeat a weapon by being polite to it. You attack its weaknesses. Commander Singh leaned forward. What's their reproduction rate? They have to be getting their raw materials from somewhere. They consume planets, Thane explained. They strip everything, biomass, minerals, even the atmosphere. So they need to hold territory to keep expanding, Captain Rodriguez noted. That's a vulnerability we can exploit. The Alliance officers looked at each other in confusion. How was the enemy's greatest strength a vulnerability? Admiral Chen studied the tactical display for several minutes. Your problem isn't that you can't beat them, she said finally. Your problem is that you're trying to beat them the wrong way. You're fighting the kind of war you want to fight, not the kind of war you need to fight. What do you mean? Asked Thane. You're trying to protect everything at once. You spread your forces thin, you avoid taking risks, and you retreat whenever things get difficult. Against a normal enemy, that might work. Against something like the Ravagers, it's suicide. Chen turned to face the assembled officers. The Ravagers win because they're willing to sacrifice everything to achieve their goals. If you want to beat them, you have to be willing to do the same. The alien officers shifted uncomfortably. The concept of acceptable losses was foreign to their civilized approach to conflict. They fought to preserve life in harmony, not to destroy it. We don't abandon our people, Thane said firmly. I'm not asking you to, Chen replied. I'm asking you to make hard choices. Sometimes you have to lose a battle to win a war. Sometimes you have to sacrifice the few to save the many. She gestured to the tactical display. The Ravagers are 2 weeks away from your core worlds. If you keep fighting the way you have been, they'll consume everything. But if you're willing to try something different, we might have a chance. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The humans were not here to provide simple military support. They were here to change everything about how this war was being fought. The first joint operation was scheduled for 0800 hours Alliance Standard Time. Thane had spent the entire night reviewing the battle plan with his staff officers. It was a straightforward mission: destroy a Ravager breeding facility that had been established in the Kepler Nebula. The plan followed standard Alliance military doctrine. The alien fleet would approach in formation, establish a protective perimeter, and conduct a precision strike against the enemy installation. The human ships would provide support from a safe distance, while the more experienced Alliance forces handled the primary assault. Admiral Chen had listened to the briefing without comment, though Thane noticed the human officer's expression growing more skeptical as the presentation continued. When asked if she had any questions, Chen simply said, "We'll be ready." The combined fleet moved into position just outside the Kepler Nebula. Long-range sensors confirmed the presence of a massive Ravager facility deep within the nebula's swirling gases, along with dozens of bioships patrolling the area. The Alliance ships formed their traditional battle formation. Weapons charged, shields at maximum power, every system operating in perfect harmony. "All ships, this is Coordinator Thane," came the announcement over the communication channel. "Begin advance to target coordinates, maintain formation, and follow established protocols." The alien fleet moved forward in perfect formation, their elegant ships gliding through space like a school of luminous fish. It was a beautiful sight, the kind of coordinated military display that the Alliance took pride in. The human ships did something completely different. Instead of joining the formation, Admiral Chen's fleet spread out in what looked like a chaotic pattern. Some ships moved high above the plane of battle, others dropped low, and a few seemed to be heading in completely wrong directions. "Admiral Chen," Thane called over the communication channel, "you're breaking formation. Please return to your assigned position." "Negative, Coordinator," came the reply. "We're doing this our way." Before Thane could respond, the human ship suddenly accelerated to maximum speed and charged directly toward the enemy. Their approach was not the careful, measured advance of civilized warfare. It was the wild rush of predators attacking prey. The Ravager bioships moved to intercept them, expecting the humans to retreat or at least slow down when faced with superior numbers. Instead, the human ships increased speed and opened fire with weapons that defied everything the aliens knew about space combat. Instead of elegant energy beams, the humans used crude but devastating kinetic weapons. Massive slugs of metal flew through space at incredible speeds, punching through Ravager bioarmor like it was made of paper. The alien observers watched in shock as human ships deliberately rammed enemy vessels, using their own hulls as weapons. Captain Rodriguez's ship, the *Mumbai*, took heavy damage from 3 Ravager vessels that surrounded it. Any civilized captain would have retreated to fight another day. Rodriguez ordered her crew to overload the ship's reactor and ram the largest enemy vessel. The explosion lit up the nebula like a small star. When the light faded, both ships were gone, along with 2 other Ravager vessels that had been caught in the blast. The alien officers watching from the command ship sat in stunned silence. "Did she just sacrifice her entire ship?" asked Commander Lyra. "And took 4 enemy ships with her." Admiral Chen's voice came over the communication channel. "Rodriguez always was good at math." The human admiral spoke about the loss of an entire ship and crew, as if it were a successful trade rather than a tragedy. This casual acceptance of death was something the Alliance officers could not understand. The battle continued to unfold in ways that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Human ships used their own damaged sections as projectiles, launching pieces of their hulls at enemy targets. When their weapons ran out of ammunition, they began improvising, using industrial equipment and even cargo containers as weapons. Commander Singh's ship lost its main guns early in the fight, but instead of withdrawing, she ordered her crew to vent the ship's atmosphere in controlled bursts, using the escaping gas to blind enemy biosensors. While the Ravager ship struggled to target her vessel, Singh's crew manually launched nuclear warheads from the torpedo tubes. The Ravager forces, programmed to fight conventional military tactics, found themselves completely overwhelmed by the chaotic and unpredictable human approach. Every time they adapted to one human tactic, the humans immediately switched to something completely different. When the human ship Defiant lost its engines, Captain Miller ordered his crew to use the ship's artificial gravity generators to create gravity wells. The tactic turned the disabled ship into a massive trap, pulling enemy vessels off course and into the firing range of other human ships. The aliens watched in horror as human crews continued fighting, even when their ships were heavily damaged. Emergency bulkheads became improvised weapons. Life support systems were redirected to create toxic atmospheres in areas where Ravager-boarding organisms tried to enter. The humans turned every system on their ships into potential weapons. "This is madness," whispered Dr. Luna from her position on the command bridge. "They're destroying their own ships." "No," said Thane, beginning to understand what he was seeing. "They're using their ships as tools. Every piece of damage serves a purpose." The most shocking moment came when the human ship Vengeance lost its main hull and was reduced to just its engine section and command module. Instead of abandoning ship, the crew continued fighting, using their remaining thrusters to turn their dying vessel into a guided missile. The small section of ship, no bigger than a shuttle, managed to penetrate the defenses of the main Ravager command organism. The nuclear explosion that followed destroyed not only the enemy creature, but also disabled the coordination systems for the entire Ravager fleet. Without their command structure, the remaining Ravager vessels began acting independently, making them easy targets for the coordinated Alliance fleet. The battle that should have been a careful, calculated engagement became a complete rout of enemy forces. When the fighting ended, Thane surveyed the battlefield. The Ravager facility was completely destroyed, along with every enemy bioship in the system. The mission had been a complete success by any military standard. But the cost horrified the alien commanders. The human fleet had lost 8 ships completely, and every remaining vessel was heavily damaged. By Alliance standards, this would be considered a disaster. Any commander who suffered such losses would be court-martialed. Admiral Chen seemed completely unconcerned about the casualties. "Good work, everyone," she announced to her remaining ships. "Repair what you can and prepare for the next engagement." Thane opened a private communication channel to the human admiral. Admiral, your losses were considerable. Perhaps we should return to base for repairs and reinforcements. Losses? Chen sounded genuinely confused. Coordinator, we accomplished our mission with minimal casualties. We destroyed a major enemy facility and eliminated their entire local fleet. I'd call that a success. The alien coordinator struggled to find words. Admiral, you lost 8 ships and over 4,000 crew members. And the enemy lost everything, Chen replied matter-of-factly. That's what we call a favorable exchange rate. The communication channel fell silent. Thane stared out at the wreckage of the battle, trying to understand how the humans could view such destruction as acceptable. These were not the primitive allies he had expected. These were warriors who understood something about warfare that civilized species had forgotten. Sometimes survival required choices that peaceful beings were not willing to make. 3 weeks after the Kepler Nebula battle, the combined fleet faced its greatest challenge yet. The Ravagers had launched a massive assault on Haven Prime, the Alliance's most important cultural center. The planet housed over 50 million beings and contained the greatest libraries, museums, and art galleries in known space. Thane stood in the command center of the Asterisk Harmony of Worlds Asterisk, watching the tactical display with growing despair. The Ravagers had surrounded Haven Prime with over 300 bioships, the largest force they had deployed since the war began. Traditional rescue attempts would be impossible against such overwhelming numbers. We need to evacuate the planet, Commander Lyra suggested. We can save the people and preserve what culture we can elsewhere. Admiral Chen studied the display from her position near the main screen. The human officer had been unusually quiet during the briefing, her weathered face showing deep concentration. When she finally spoke, her words made everyone in the room uncomfortable. Evacuation won't work, she said simply. The Ravagers will just follow the evacuation ships and destroy them in space. If we want to save those people, we have to hold the planet. Hold it with what? Thane asked. We're outnumbered 6-1. Numbers don't always matter, Chen replied. Sometimes the terrain decides the battle, not the size of the armies. Before anyone could ask what she meant, Commander Singh's voice came over the communication system. Admiral, we've completed our reconnaissance of Haven Prime. We have some ideas. Chen nodded. Send your teams down, Commander. You know what to do. Thane watched as human shuttles descended to Haven Prime's surface. He had no idea what the humans were planning, but their previous tactics had taught him to expect the unexpected. What he saw over the next few hours challenged everything he believed about military ethics. Commander Singh's engineering teams spread throughout Haven Prime's major cities like a virus, making modifications that turned the peaceful world into something else entirely. They rewired power grids, reprogrammed automated systems, and installed equipment that had no place on a civilized world. What are they doing? Dr. Luna asked as she watched the human activities through the planetary monitoring system. Preparing, Chen answered, without looking away from her tactical display. They're giving us an advantage. The Ravagers expect to fight a defenseless cultural center. We're turning it into something they've never encountered before. The transformation was subtle but comprehensive. The planet's manufacturing centers began producing materials that were definitely not for peaceful purposes. The waste processing systems were modified to create chemical compounds that would be lethal to both organic and biomechanical systems. Even the agricultural centers were converted to serve military purposes. When the Ravager fleet finally attacked, they encountered defenses that made no sense according to civilized military doctrine. As enemy biopods breached the planetary atmosphere, they found themselves fighting not just human soldiers, but the planet itself. The atmospheric processors had been turned into weapons, releasing corrosive gases into areas controlled by the Ravagers. The gravity control systems created crushing fields that disabled enemy organisms. The lighting networks strobed at frequencies that interfered with Ravager neural systems. Captain Miller, who had somehow survived the destruction of his previous ship, commanded the planet's improvised defense force. His tactics would have been considered atrocities by Alliance standards, but they were devastatingly effective against the biomechanical invaders. When Ravager forces took control of a major city center, Miller's team simply flooded the area with superheated steam from the geothermal plants, turning the enemy's victory into a trap. When the bioorganisms tried to access the computer networks, they found viruses that had been designed specifically to damage their adaptive programming. The humans had weaponized everything on the planet. Food processing centers became chemical weapons factories. Medical facilities were repurposed to produce substances toxic to Ravager biology. Even the cultural centers were converted into improvised weapons manufacturing sites. But it was the human treatment of captured Ravager specimens that truly disturbed the alien observers. When Alliance forces captured enemy biotech, they studied it carefully and humanely, following established protocols for specimen examination. The humans approached captured Ravager organisms like predators examining prey. Commander Singh's technical teams dissected captured bioships with surgical precision, not to understand them, but to find their weaknesses. Every piece of Ravager technology was analyzed for vulnerabilities that could be exploited. The humans learned faster than the organisms could adapt. "They're not studying the enemy," Dr. Luna observed with growing horror. "They're hunting them." The captured Ravager specimens provided intelligence that the humans immediately integrated into new weapons and tactics. Within hours of capturing a Ravager communication organism, human forces were jamming enemy coordination signals across the entire battlefield. When they discovered how Ravager bioarmor functioned, they developed weapons specifically designed to penetrate it. The biomechanical invaders, programmed to fight conventional military forces, found themselves facing an enemy that turned their own strengths against them. The Ravager's ability to adapt was useless when the humans changed tactics faster than the organisms could process new information. The most shocking moment came when Ravager forces managed to capture one of the planet's primary command centers. Instead of trying to retake it, Commander Singh simply sealed the area and began flooding it with radiation that was harmless to humans but deadly to Ravager biosystems. "You're irradiating your own facility," Thane protested over the communication channel. "Acceptable contamination," Singh replied calmly. "We can clean it up later. The Ravagers can't adapt if they're too busy dying." The battle raged for 22 hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt once the humans began implementing their modified defenses. The Ravager forces, designed to overwhelm through numbers and adaptation, found themselves trapped in a maze of improvised weapons and impossible tactics. When the last enemy organism was destroyed, Haven Prime still functioned, though it bore little resemblance to the peaceful cultural center it had been before the battle. The humans had transformed it into a fortress that could defend itself against any conventional attack. Thane toured the planet after the battle, accompanied by Admiral Chen and several other human officers. What he saw made him question everything he thought he knew about warfare and civilization. Nerman, the humans had saved 50 million lives, but they had done so by turning their sanctuary into a weapon. Every system on the planet had been modified for war. Every building contained improvised defenses. Every street had become a potential killing ground. "How do you live with this?" Thane asked as they stood in what had once been a children's park, now converted into an ammunition depot. Admiral Chen looked around the modified space with no visible emotion. "We live with it because the alternative is not living at all," she replied. "Your people have the luxury of fighting clean wars because you've never faced an enemy that wanted to eliminate your entire species." The alien coordinator stared at the weapon stockpiles, where children had played just days before. "But at what cost? You've turned a place of peace into a fortress of war." "We've turned a target into a survivor," Chen corrected. "The Ravagers don't care about your concepts of peace and civilization. They only understand strength and weakness. We made sure this planet represented strength." As they continued their tour, Thane began to understand something that chilled him to his core. The humans were not just willing to fight dirty, they were experts at it. They had spent their entire evolutionary history learning to survive against impossible odds, and they had brought that savage expertise to the stars. The Harmonious Alliance had asked for military assistance, but what they had received was something far more dangerous. They had unleashed a species that understood warfare in ways that civilized beings could not comprehend. And there was no putting that knowledge back in the box. The final battle would take place in the Ravager home system, where the original biofleet had first spawned 18 months earlier. Long-range scouts reported that the enemy had gathered their entire remaining fleet there, over 1,200 bioships surrounding a massive organic structure that was producing new vessels at an alarming rate. Thane stood in the command center of the combined fleet, studying the tactical display with growing dread. The Ravagers had positioned themselves perfectly, using the system's asteroid fields and planetary debris as natural shields. Any conventional assault would be suicide. "They're building a mother organism," Dr. Luna reported from her analysis station. "If it becomes fully mature, it could produce Ravager bioships faster than we can destroy them. We have maybe 3 days before it reaches critical mass." The assembled alien commanders looked at the display in despair. Even with the human reinforcements they had received over the past 2 months, they were still outnumbered 4-1. The enemy position was nearly impregnable, and time was running out. Admiral Chen studied the sensor data with the same calm expression she had worn throughout the war. Her human fleet had grown since their first meeting, reinforced by ships that seemed to appear from nowhere. But even the expanded human force would not be enough for a direct assault. "What about a siege?" suggested Commander Lyra. "We could blockade the system and wait for them to come to us." "The mother organism will be fully mature before a siege becomes effective," Thane replied. "We need to attack now, but I don't see how we can break through their defenses." Admiral Chen finally spoke, her voice carrying the weight of a decision that would affect the entire galaxy. "We can break through," she said quietly, "but not in the way you're thinking." She activated her personal tactical display, showing a 3-dimensional map of the Ravager home system. As the other officers watched, she began highlighting specific asteroids and debris fields throughout the area. "For the past 4 months, we've been placing charges," Chen explained. "Every system we've fought in, every asteroid field we've passed through, every piece of space debris larger than a fighter. My people have been very busy." The display showed thousands of small marks scattered throughout the system. Thane stared at the pattern, beginning to understand the scope of what the humans had been planning. "You've mined the entire system?" he asked in disbelief. "Not mined," Chen corrected. "Weaponized. Every piece of rock and metal in this system is now under our control. When the Ravager fleet moves to engage us, we're going to turn their defensive position into a kill zone." Dr. Luna looked at the display with growing horror. "Admiral, there are research stations in this system, mining colonies on 2 of the inner planets. You're talking about destroying everything." "The research stations were evacuated last week," Commander Singh reported. "The mining colonies chose to stay and help with the operation. They're safe in their underground facilities." "But the system itself," Dr. Luna protested. "The planets, the asteroid belt, the infrastructure that took centuries to build, you're going to destroy all of it." Admiral Chen met her gaze without flinching. "Yes," she said simply, "because if we don't, the Ravagers will destroy not just this system, but every system in the galaxy. Sometimes you have to sacrifice what you have to save what you can." The alien officers stood in stunned silence. The humans were proposing to turn an entire star system into a weapon, destroying everything in it to defeat their enemy. It was a level of destruction that civilized species could not comprehend. "There has to be another way," Thane said desperately. Admiral Chen's expression did change. "Coordinator, I've been fighting impossible wars for 30 years. I've learned that when you're facing extinction, there's no such thing as another way. There's only what works and what gets everyone killed." She gestured to the tactical display. "The Ravagers chose this system because they thought it was defensible. They were right against any conventional attack, but we're not conventional." Commander Singh stepped forward. "Sir, all charges are in position. We have control of 97% of all significant mass in the system. The remaining 3% won't affect the operation." Thane felt his crystalline structure dim with the weight of what was being proposed. "How many charges did you place?" 47,000 nuclear devices, Admiral Chen replied matter-of-factly, each one positioned to create maximum debris velocity when detonated. When we trigger them, every piece of matter in this system will become a projectile moving at significant fractions of light speed. Dr. Luna's voice was barely a whisper. "You're going to turn the entire system into a shotgun blast." "Essentially, yes," Commander Singh confirmed. "The Ravagers can adapt to energy weapons, biological weapons, even conventional kinetic weapons. but they can't adapt to having 1 trillion tons of matter moving at relativistic speeds, occupying the same space they do. The horror of the plan began to sink in for the alien officers. The humans weren't just proposing to destroy the enemy, they were going to obliterate everything in the system, turning an entire star system into a weapon of mass destruction. The environmental damage, Dr. Luna protested. The stellar mechanics will be disrupted. The gravitational effects could destabilize neighboring systems. We ran the calculations, Admiral Chen said. The primary star will survive, though it'll be tidally locked for a few thousand years. The neighboring systems will experience some minor gravitational fluctuations, but nothing that threatens inhabited worlds. Minor fluctuations? Thane stared at her in disbelief. You're talking about rearranging the fundamental structure of space-time in this region. We're talking about survival, Chen replied firmly. The Ravagers end here, or they consume everything. Those are the only two options. As if summoned by the conversation, alerts began sounding throughout the command center. The Ravager fleet was moving, advancing from their defensive positions toward the combined Alliance and the human fleet. They're taking the bait, Commander Singh reported. All enemy vessels are moving into optimal firing positions. Admiral Chen studied the tactical display as over 1,000 bioships arranged themselves in attack formation. The mother organism remained in the center of the system, protected by the largest concentration of Ravager forces ever assembled. They think they have us trapped, Chen observed. Good. Fear makes people stupid, but overconfidence makes them dead. She opened a communication channel to all ships in the human fleet. All vessels, this is Admiral Chen. Execute Operation Starfall in 30 seconds. Fight well, die hard, and remember Earth is watching. The responses that came back over the channel would haunt Thane for the rest of his long life. Instead of fear or hesitation, the human crews responded with what could only be described as anticipation. These people were not just willing to die, they were eager to take their enemies with them. Starfall in 20 seconds, Chen announced. The Ravager fleet accelerated toward the human and Alliance forces, their bioships moving in perfect coordination. They had learned from previous battles, adapting their tactics to counter human unpredictability. They were confident they could overwhelm their enemies through sheer numbers and superior positioning. 10 seconds. Thane watched the enemy fleet advance, knowing that in a few moments, everything in the system would be destroyed. The scale of destruction was beyond anything his species had ever contemplated. 5 seconds. The Ravager bioships opened fire, their organic weapons reaching out across the void toward the human fleet. Execute. What happened next defied every law of physics that civilized species understood. 47,000 nuclear devices detonated simultaneously throughout the star system. Each explosion had been precisely calculated to maximize the velocity of the resulting debris. Asteroids that had orbited peacefully for millions of years became projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed. The debris from destroyed space stations and mining platforms turned into clouds of relativistic shrapnel. The Ravager fleet found itself in the middle of a phenomenon that had never occurred in recorded galactic history. An entire star system turned into a weapon. The bioship's adaptive capabilities were useless against the storm of matter that engulfed them. There was no tactic to counter, no strategy to adapt to. The Ravagers simply found themselves occupying the same space as trillions of tons of accelerated matter. The destruction was not just complete, it was absolute. Bioships that had survived dozens of battles were reduced to their component atoms in microseconds. The mother organism, protected by layers of organic armor that could withstand direct nuclear strikes, was torn apart by debris moving at velocities that turned individual pebbles into planet killers. The human fleet, positioned outside the blast radius, watched as their enemy was annihilated in a display of destruction that would be visible from neighboring star systems. When the cosmic storm finally subsided, the Ravager home system no longer existed in any recognizable form. Where there had once been planets, asteroids, and space stations, there was now only an expanding cloud of superheated gas and the twisted remains of over 1,000 bioships. System clear, Commander Singh reported, her voice professionally calm despite the magnitude of what had just occurred. No surviving Ravager signatures detected. The communication channel was silent for several long moments. When Thane finally found his voice, it was filled with a mixture of awe and horror. "Admiral Chen," he said slowly, "what have you done?" "What needed to be done," she replied. "The Ravager threat is ended. Your people are safe. But the cost?" "The cost was acceptable," Admiral Chen interrupted. "We lost no ships, no personnel. The enemy lost everything. By any reasonable military standard, this was a perfect victory." Thane stared at the expanding cloud of debris that had once been a star system. "You destroyed everything. The planets, the infrastructure, the history of this entire region of space. We preserved the future," Chen corrected. "Everything else was already lost the moment the Ravagers decided to use this system as their base. We just acknowledged reality and acted accordingly." Dr. Luna spoke from her station, her voice shaking. The energy release was equivalent to several supernovas. "The gravitational waves will be detectable across half the galaxy." "Good," Admiral Chen said. "Let everyone know what happens when someone threatens human allies. It might prevent future misunderstandings." Prologue. 6 months after the Battle of the Ravager system, Thane stood in the Grand Assembly Hall of the Harmonious Alliance. The same hall where they had first discussed the Ravager threat now hosted a very different kind of gathering. The war was over. The Ravager threat had been eliminated so completely that not a single bioship remained anywhere in known space. The galaxy was safe, and the Alliance had survived. But the cost of that survival was a question that would haunt civilized species for generations to come. High Chancellor Zephyr addressed the assembled representatives, her gossamer wings catching the light as she spoke. "The threat to our peaceful way of life has been eliminated. We owe our survival to our human allies, whose methods, while unconventional, proved effective where our own had failed." A murmur went through the assembly. The word unconventional was perhaps the greatest understatement in galactic diplomatic history. "However," Zephyr continued, "we must now address the implications of what we have witnessed. Our human allies have demonstrated capabilities that challenge our fundamental understanding of acceptable military conduct." Admiral Chen sat in the section reserved for military representatives, her expression as calm as it had been throughout the war. She had aged visibly during the conflict, but her eyes still held the same hard determination that had saved the galaxy. "The humans fought with methods that we, as civilized beings, cannot endorse," Zephyr said carefully. "They turned entire worlds into weapons, sacrificed their own forces without hesitation, and ultimately destroyed an entire star system to achieve victory. While we are grateful for the results, we cannot ignore the precedent this sets." Representative Call from the Sapphire Collective stood to address the assembly. "The question before us is simple. How do we coexist with allies who view warfare as we view natural disasters as forces of nature to be unleashed rather than contained?" The debate that followed was unlike any in Alliance history. Some representatives argued that the humans had saved them all and deserved gratitude, not condemnation. Others contended that the methods used were so extreme that they threatened the very foundations of civilized society. When Admiral Chen was finally called upon to speak, she rose slowly and walked to the center of the hall. The assembled representatives fell silent, waiting to hear from the woman who had saved their galaxy by methods they could not comprehend. "Honored representatives," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall, "I understand your concerns. My people fought this war in ways that your species find disturbing. We made choices that you would never make, and we did things that you consider morally questionable." She paused, looking around the hall at the faces of beings from 43 different worlds. "But I want you to understand something about humans. We don't fight wars because we enjoy them. We don't kill because we're cruel. We do these things because we've learned that sometimes the choice isn't between good and evil, it's between survival and extinction." The hall remained silent as she continued. "Your species had the luxury of developing in a universe where conflicts could be resolved through negotiation, where enemies could be reasoned with, where violence was a last resort that rarely needed to be used. My species developed in a universe that was actively trying to kill us every single day." Admiral Chen gestured toward the tactical display that showed the former location of the Ravager system. "The Ravagers weren't evil. They weren't motivated by hatred or greed or any emotion we could understand. They were simply following their nature, which was to consume everything in their path. Against such an enemy, your methods of civilized warfare were not just ineffective, they were suicidal. She met the gaze of several representatives as she spoke. We didn't save your galaxy because we wanted to be heroes. We saved it because extinction is permanent, and everything else can be rebuilt. You can restore destroyed worlds, reconstruct fallen civilizations, and even repair damaged ecosystems. But you can't bring back extinct species. When she finished speaking, the hall remained silent for several long minutes. Finally, Elder Sage spoke from her position at the center of the assembly. Admiral Chen, your words carry wisdom that we find difficult to accept but impossible to deny. Your people saved us all, and for that, we owe you a debt that can never be repaid. The ancient crystalline being's form pulsed with inner light as she continued. However, we must also acknowledge that your methods have changed us. The knowledge of what civilized beings are capable of when pushed to the edge of extinction cannot be unknown. We can never again claim ignorance of the true nature of warfare. Admiral Chen nodded slowly. That's the burden of survival, Elder Sage. Once you've seen how far you're willing to go to protect what matters, you can never pretend you don't know. The formal debate continued for hours, but the real decision had already been made. The Harmonious Alliance would maintain its alliance with humanity, but it would be a changed relationship. The humans had saved them, but they had also shown them a reflection of themselves that no civilized species wanted to see. As the assembly finally concluded, Thane approached Admiral Chen in the corridor outside the hall. Admiral, he said quietly, I have one final question. Throughout this entire war, you and your people fought with a level of intensity that we found difficult to understand. But I've watched you, and I've seen that you take no pleasure in the destruction you cause. How do you reconcile that? Admiral Chen looked out through the crystal windows at the peaceful city beyond. Gentle beings moved through gardens and parks, their lives untouched by the horrors that had threatened to consume them all. Coordinator Thane, she said finally, my people have a saying, the price of peace is eternal vigilance. But I think we've learned something new during this war. Sometimes the price of peace is having people willing to pay prices that peaceful beings cannot. She turned to face him directly. Your people asked us to help you fight a war. We did what we do best, we won it. The cost was terrible, but extinction would have been worse. You can judge our methods, but you cannot argue with our results. As Admiral Chen walked away, Thane remained in the corridor, contemplating her words. The Harmonious Alliance had survived, but it had been forever changed by its encounter with a species that understood warfare in ways that civilized beings could not comprehend. The galaxy was safe, but it was no longer innocent. In the depths of space, where the Ravager system had once existed, a memorial beacon broadcast a simple message in all known languages. Here lies the end of the Ravager threat. Here also lies the end of the galaxy's innocence. Remember both, and choose wisely which future you will create. The beacon would broadcast for 1,000 years, a reminder of what civilized beings were capable of when they chose survival over principle. Some would call it a monument to victory. Others would call it a warning. Perhaps it was both. The human fleet departed Alliance space 3 days later, their scarred ships disappearing into the void as quietly as they had arrived. They left behind a galaxy that was safe, but forever changed by the knowledge of what safety had cost. And in the deepest vaults of the Alliance archives, sealed records contain the complete tactical specifications of Operation Starfall, preserved not as a historical curiosity, but as a reminder that sometimes the difference between civilization and extinction was the willingness to abandon civilization itself. The galaxy was at peace. But it was a peace built on the knowledge that somewhere in the darkness, the descendants of a small blue world stood ready to pay prices that civilized beings could not imagine, to protect a future that peaceful species could not defend alone. And perhaps in the end, that was exactly the kind of peace the universe needed.